It's been a minute, but I'm back. And if you're new here, welcome to Mr. Ross Story Trail, where the stories aren't just good, they mean something. We're rebuilding, aiming for that first 1,000 subscribers. So if these stories speak to you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. You belong here. Now, let me tell you what happened when a powerful CEO mocked the wrong woman, and how she showed up holding the one thing he never expected. Cassian Holt stood at the center of the room, polished, confident, and pretending to care about a conversation he'd already forgotten, until the room fell quiet. Not gradually, instantly. All eyes shifted toward the entrance. She had arrived, Iria Delaney, the woman no one expected to show her face. Not here, not tonight, and certainly not like this. She walked in calm and poised, dressed like elegance itself. But it wasn't her presence that stole the air out of the room. It was the two children beside her, a boy and a girl, holding her hands, and they weren't just any children. They had his eyes. Cassian froze. His fingers loosened. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered at his feet. You could feel the energy shift. Is that her? Are those his kids? She really showed up with them? No way he saw this coming. Someone in the crowd chuckled under their breath. He had spent years burying what they had. And in one moment, she returned, holding the proof of everything he lost. Have you ever watched someone walk back into your life, holding the one truth you tried hardest to forget? Because this story, it's not just about heartbreak. It's about pride, absence, consequences, and what happens when love shows up long after you stop deserving it. If you've ever felt the sting of being forgotten, or if you believe real love finds its way back, like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments and make sure you subscribe to this channel. The kind of stories we tell, you'll feel them long after they end. Cassian hadn't seen her in nearly 5 years. Not since that night she walked out of his penthouse with tears in her eyes, and he let her go without asking her to stay. Now here she was, standing in the same room as him, but a world away, confident, composed, and not alone. He didn't need a DNA test. He knew the truth the second he looked into their eyes. And suddenly, every win, every title, every dollar he'd ever earned felt empty. The people around him kept whispering. Some laughed quietly, some watched with pity. But Iria, she wasn't here to make a scene. She didn't need revenge. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. She didn't come back to cause damage. She came back to show him what he missed, and now he couldn't look away. Have you ever let someone slip away because you were too focused on chasing a version of success that couldn't hold you at night? Or maybe you were the one who left, hoping they'd come after you, but they never did. This story will show you what happens when silence turns into distance. When love is present, but no longer waiting. If you're still watching, this one is going to stay with you. Click subscribe. We're not just telling stories. We're reminding people of the things they almost forgot to feel. Before the tailored suits and executive meetings, before the headlines and press releases, Cassian Holt was just a man with calloused ambition and restless eyes. He lived in a small loft above a bookstore downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old pages and burnt coffee. His furniture didn't match. He worked late. He ate standing up. But his dreams? They were skyscraper-sized. That night, he didn't plan on stopping. He had only cut through the old gallery on 9th to avoid the rain, a quick detour on his way to meet a property investor. But something made him pause, something quiet. She was sitting in the corner of the gallery, barefoot, knees tucked up, sketching in a worn notebook that had clearly lived a long life. Her dress, dark velvet, brushed the floor like it belonged to a different era. Her hair was pinned up loosely, strands falling forward as she focused. She didn't notice anyone else in the room. Cassian didn't move for a full minute. It wasn't just her presence, it was how the room changed around her, as if everything else stepped back to let her be. A staff member walked by, offering him champagne. He didn't take it. Instead, he stepped closer. "You always draw in public?" he asked, voice low but curious. She looked up, calmly, not startled, just present. "Only when the light feels right," she said, then went back to sketching as if that was enough. Cassian chuckled softly. "Does it? It does now." That was the beginning. They talked for hours without realizing it. What started as a simple question about sketching turned into a slow, wandering conversation about everything and nothing. How she saw emotion in shadows, how he believed in control over chaos. Neither of them tried to impress, neither of them needed to. He asked her name. "Iria," she said, like the flower, but not spelled the same. and when she asked his, he hesitated before offering it. Cassian, sounds like someone who doesn't belong in real estate, she smiled. I don't, he said. Not really. I just happen to be good at it. They ended up sitting on the gallery steps after closing, the city humming around them, wrapped in a stillness that didn't need to be explained. She pulled her legs into her chest, still barefoot. He took off his coat and laid it beside her without a word. The stars were out, the streetlights flickered, but time didn't feel real in that moment. She told him how she hated being the center of attention, how she preferred quiet corners and messy notebooks. He admitted he used to write music as a teenager but never showed anyone. You still play? She asked. Only when no one's around. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, That's a shame. At some point, the conversation stopped being words and started being pauses, glances, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. By the time the sky began to lighten, neither of them had moved from the steps. When they finally stood, she didn't ask for his number. She just said, If you ever want to see what the world looks like through someone else's eyes, come back here. He did, the very next night. Their love never needed an audience. There were no grand gestures, no viral moments, just the kind of closeness that settles into a rhythm, like breath, or a familiar song that plays in your head without asking. In the mornings, Iria brushed her hair in front of the window, not for anyone else, just because she liked the ritual. Cassian would stand behind her with his coffee, saying nothing, simply watching. Not in a possessive way, but with the quiet focus of someone afraid to interrupt something sacred. He wasn't good at words, she never asked him to be. Sometimes, they'd sit in silence for an hour, him reading, her sketching, no pressure to fill the air. He found peace in her presence. She found calm in his steadiness, even when the world outside moved too fast. One Sunday, she painted on the kitchen wall, not a canvas, the wall itself. A scene of hands reaching across open space. He didn't stop her, didn't ask why. He just walked over, dipped his fingers in the same paint, and added his hand to hers. They didn't talk about it after. Theirs was a love built on the kind of understanding that didn't need permission. At night, they'd lie in bed and talk like the world outside didn't exist. Sometimes it was about fears. Sometimes it was about nothing at all. But one evening, just before the snow started falling, she asked softly, Do you think love is enough? He looked at her for a long moment. It is with you, and that was all she needed to hear. The storm outside had been building all afternoon. By evening, the city was wrapped in silence. No horns, no footsteps, just wind against glass and the low hum of the heater. Cassian lit the small lamp beside the bed. Iria curled up beneath the covers, a book in her lap, but her eyes weren't moving across the page. They were watching him, the way he moved through the room with careful hands, and that quiet kind of presence that said more than words ever could. He sat beside her, the mattress dipping slightly. She reached for him, her fingers brushing the scar across his shoulder blade. He flinched at first. Still not used to that? She whispered. Still feels like something I need to hide. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. You don't have to hide anything from me. It wasn't passion that guided them that night. It was something deeper. The way she looked at him with kindness he didn't know how to accept. The way his hand lingered on her waist, steady, respectful. Like he was holding something rare. They didn't rush. There were pauses between their kisses, smiles that turned into sighs, fingers tracing outlines as if learning each other for the first time. There was laughter in the middle of it, soft and surprising. And there were tears, too, not from pain, but from the weight of feeling understood. It wasn't about claiming. It wasn't about escape. It was about safety. It was the kind of night that made the rest of the world feel far away, where the connection wasn't just physical, it was all of it. Memories, hopes, wounds, forgiveness. By morning, neither of them said anything about what had happened. They didn't need to. He brought her tea. She brought him peace. Cassian's rise wasn't sudden, but it was relentless. He moved from a quiet downtown office into a corner suite high above the city. His meetings grew longer. His schedule tighter. His gaze more distant. He didn't mean to drift, but in chasing the life he thought they both wanted, he stopped noticing what he already had. Iria never asked him to stop. She understood drive. She admired discipline, but what once looked like passion started to feel like distance. Her place in his life, once so certain, now felt optional. Like she was a part of his world only when there was time, and there was never time anymore. He began sleeping with his phone on the nightstand, checking emails before kissing her good morning. She started eating dinner alone, her plate quiet across from an empty chair. The wall she had painted, the one with the hands, sat unfinished for months. It wasn't a sudden fracture, it was slow erosion, the kind that doesn't make a sound. He'd walk in at midnight, loosen his tie, and apologize with half a smile. She'd nod, say I understand, and fold the pain into silence. She missed the version of him who listened, who stayed. He missed nothing, because he thought this was what success looked like. But her eyes began to change, less open, less curious. Her laughter grew shorter, and her sketchbook stayed closed more often. Still she waited. Still she hoped. Until the night everything stopped pretending. Maple Bay was the kind of town where people didn't ask too many questions, and for Rhea Delaney, that was enough. She arrived in late spring, carrying little more than her art supplies, a folded letter she never sent, and a future she hadn't fully planned. The rental cottage sat near the water, tucked behind an overgrown garden and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. The air smelled clean, like new beginnings. She never told anyone who she had been before. The neighbors greeted her kindly but didn't push. The town moved at its own pace, and she found comfort in the quiet rhythm. Morning walks to the local bakery, evenings sketching by the shore. She didn't smile much at first, but when she did, it came from someplace real. Months passed. And then came the twins, Arlen and Novea, born under a calm sky with no complications, no visitors, no headlines, just a nurse holding her hand, whispering, "They're perfect." And they were. Arlen had the curious frown of a boy already asking questions. Novea's eyes didn't blink often. She stared, as if she already knew the world would need watching. They both had a softness that reminded Iria what tenderness looked like, and a gaze that made her heart ache for reasons she never said out loud. The nights were long, the feedings frequent. But she didn't complain. She learned to balance a baby in one arm and a paintbrush in the other. She told them stories, not about princes or faraway kingdoms, but about courage, truth, and the strength of choosing kindness when it would be easier not to. She never spoke their father's name. When asked, she'd simply say, "He was someone I once loved, and he gave me the two best parts of himself." That was enough. As the twins grew, so did Iria, not in stature, but in steadiness. Her days followed her rhythm. Mornings began with small hands tugging at her robe and cereal spilling onto the floor. By mid-morning, she'd set up her easel on the porch while the twins napped or played with wooden blocks on a blanket nearby. The sound of wind through the trees became her background music. There was no need to rush. Each week they visited the town library. Novea always reached for the same book, worn with drawings of strong-hearted girls who stood up for what mattered. Arlen preferred animal stories and asked endless questions. Why do birds leave? Do they come back? Iria always answered with patience, even when the questions came faster than she could think. At night she told them stories she made up on the spot, about a mother who lived near the sea with her two brave children, and how they weren't waiting to be saved, because they had already learned how to live fully. The children never knew the stories were about them. She sold her paintings in the nearby town, not for much, but enough. She'd often add small notes on the back, written in her careful handwriting, made on a day full of noise, given with quiet hope. Buyers never knew what that meant. She did. People in Maple Bay came to admire her, not because she was loud, but because she showed up, every day, for her children, for herself. She never posted about her past, never dropped hints. When people asked about her art or why she moved to town, she just smiled and said, "I needed stillness." The truth was, she didn't miss the noise of her old life, but some nights, when the kids were asleep and the house was dark, she'd catch herself looking at the sketch she kept in her drawer. The one of her and Cassian standing under a streetlight, drawn years ago on a napkin. She never framed it, but she never threw it away, not out of regret, out of memory, the kind that doesn't ache anymore. It just lives quietly, like a chapter you've already turned, but can still recite by heart. The envelope arrived without warning, thick cardstock, sharp edges, and her name written in calligraphy she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. Bills came folded. Letters came creased. This was neither. It sat too confidently on her table, like it belonged somewhere far from the quiet little cottage she'd built. She opened it anyway. A charity event, hosted in the city. Cassian Holt's name printed neatly at the bottom, just beneath the words, "An evening in support of children's education." She stared at the invitation for a long time. It had been 5 years. No calls, no letters, no acknowledgement. Now his name arrived dressed in formality, carried by someone else's handwriting, asking for her presence like she was just another name on a guest list. She placed it in the trash without a word. The next morning, Arlen found it. "Mom," he said, holding the slightly bent invitation, "is this for you?" She looked up from her sketchpad. "Where'd you find that?" "In the bin. It says you're invited. Are we going?" She paused. "No, sweetheart." He looked at it again. "Is he a bad guy?" The question settled over her like a cold wind. "No," she answered softly. "He's not bad. Just not here. But he's my dad, right?" She didn't reply right away. She looked at both of them. Arlen's curiosity, Novea's quiet focus. They were old enough now to wonder. And maybe she was done pretending that her peace meant forgetting the past completely. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep and the house slipped into silence, Iria sat by the window with the invitation in her lap, pulled from the trash, smoothed out but still wrinkled. She traced her finger along the printed text, not to read it again, but to feel something. Maybe anger, maybe grief. But what settled inside her wasn't either. It was clarity. She wasn't angry anymore. That part of her had gone quiet long ago. She'd stopped waiting for apologies, stopped hoping for explanations. But the children, they were growing. They were asking questions. And at some point, they deserved more than stories about shadows and kindness. They deserved to know where they came from, even if he didn't. She didn't need closure. She had built something steady without it. But maybe it was time for him to see what he'd chosen to walk away from, not out of revenge, not out of pride, out of truth. She folded the invitation in half and slid it into her notebook. Her decision wasn't loud. It didn't come with a speech or a dramatic pause. She simply nodded to herself. She would go, not to be seen, but to be known for who she became after he stopped choosing her. Would you have gone? Yes or no, and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever had to face someone who hurt you without losing your peace, this is the kind of story you'll want more of. Like, comment, and subscribe. You're not just watching a story, you're living the questions it asks. Cassian Holt knew how to command a room. His posture alone spoke of control. Spine straight, suit flawless, eyes scanning the space with ease. People didn't just greet him, they angled toward him, hoping to earn a sliver of his attention. He offered nods, smiles, brief conversations, all while sipping a drink he never really tasted. Every move was measured, every word delivered like it had been polished in advance. The event was his, every face, every sponsor, every camera lens, all arranged to reflect his version of success. It was the kind of night that confirmed power, until the air shifted. He didn't notice it at first, only that someone nearby had stopped mid-sentence. Then another. The music didn't stop, but it faded somehow. Conversations paused like a breath caught in the chest of the room. Cassian followed their eyes. At the far end of the space, just past the entrance, stood Iria Delaney. And two children. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She didn't stand on ceremony. She walked in like she belonged there, not because she was proving anything, but because she didn't owe anyone an explanation. The gown she wore was deep blue, understated but elegant. Her hair was longer than he remembered, gently falling over one shoulder. Her face had softened, but her eyes held something unshakable. On either side of her stood the twins, a boy and a girl holding her hands, wearing small matching outfits that didn't scream for attention, and yet they held the room like gravity. Cassian's breath faltered. He gripped his glass a little too tightly. The rim cracked before he even noticed. People whispered, "Is that her? Those kids?" They look like, he has to know, he let that walk away. Cassian's expression didn't change, but his chest tightened, his jaw locked, and for the first time in years, he had no idea what to say. Cassian didn't move. He couldn't. He stood in the center of a room that once belonged to him, now watching everything shift around one quiet arrival. He tried to mask it, lifting his chin, straightening his posture, but the grip on his control was slipping. He saw Lazaro across the floor, watching with that usual half-smile, saying nothing, letting the moment breathe. A few guests leaned in toward him with forced laughter, trying to fill the air with noise again. "Didn't expect her here. Guess she found someone who gave her what you couldn't. Looks like you've been replaced, Holt." He gave a tight nod, let out a small, humorless laugh, and turned away before anyone could look too closely. But inside, there was a silence that screamed. He kept his distance at first, watched from across the room, watched the way Iria gently fixed Novea's collar, the way Arlen clung to her side before growing brave enough to explore the edge of the buffet table. He watched Uriah exchange a polite nod with the pianist, thank a passing server, smile softly at someone who complimented her shoes. She wasn't performing, or she was just living. And that made it worse, because there she was, graceful, sure, and complete, with 2 children whose eyes mirrored his own, a version of life he could have had, one he chose to leave behind without knowing it. He walked toward the balcony, needing air he couldn't seem to find. Behind him, voices buzzed again. The music rose slightly. The moment passed, for everyone else, but not for him. Because no matter how far he'd climbed, no matter how many people knew his name, she had walked in with 2 quiet reminders of everything he could never buy back. And now, the man who once seemed untouchable was standing outside his own event, glass in hand, trying not to fall apart in a place he'd built. The night air was cooler on the balcony, high above the city, where the noise from the event below faded into a low hum. Cassian leaned forward against the railing, one hand gripping the edge, the other still wrapped around an untouched glass. He wasn't looking at the skyline. He was staring past it. He didn't hear her footsteps, didn't need to. He felt her presence before she spoke. "I wasn't sure if you'd come out here," Uriah said softly. He turned, slowly, as if moving too quickly would make the moment disappear. "You always liked the quiet corners," he replied. She stepped closer but kept space between them. He noticed her arms folded, not defensively, more like protection, like muscle memory. "You invited me," she said, voice even. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I almost didn't." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense, full, years of unsaid things pressing into the space between them. He looked at her, really looked. "They're mine, aren't they?" She didn't blink. "Does it matter now?" He swallowed hard. "It does to me." "They ask about you sometimes," she said, eyes on the lights below. I never knew what to say. He took a step toward her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You weren't there to tell," she answered. "You weren't listening back then. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, Cassian. I left because you stopped choosing me." His breath hitched. "I thought I was building something for us," he said. "You were building something," she corrected, "but I wasn't part of it." Another silence. This one heavier. "I never stopped thinking about you," he murmured. "That's not the same as showing up," she said, turning to face him now. "Thinking about someone is easy. Being there, that's what love looks like." He looked down, ashamed for the first time in a long time, not because she said it to hurt him, but because she was right. "They're beautiful," he whispered. "They are," he hesitated. "I see myself in them. They've only ever seen me." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that truth land. When he opened them again, she was still there, standing, not running, but not reaching for him either. "I made mistakes," he said, "big ones. I let success blind me. I convinced myself that if I gave you everything in the end, the path wouldn't matter." "I never asked for everything," she said quietly. "I asked for you." Her words hit like truth often does, clean, direct, and impossible to ignore. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges worn. "I kept this," he said, handing it to her. "Found it the night you left." She unfolded it. It was the sketch, the one she made of them dancing beneath a streetlight, smudged in places, bent from being handled too often. "I looked at it more times than I'll admit," he said, trying to remember what it felt like, "before I lost the sound of your voice." Her fingers trembled slightly as she refolded it and held it in her palm. "I never wanted to become someone you had to walk away from," he said. "I never wanted to be someone you didn't fight for," she replied. They stood there, the weight of everything suspended between them. "I'm not here to rewrite the past," she finally said. "I came because I needed to see if the person I once loved still existed somewhere inside you." "And?" he asked. "I haven't decided yet." He almost smiled, but didn't. "You still wear your hair the same way," he said softly. "You still avoid hard questions." That made her smile, just for a second. "Uriah," he said, voice lower now, "if there's any part of you that still remembers who we were, I'll wait. I won't ask you to forget the years I wasn't there. I just want a chance to be present now." She didn't give an answer. Instead, she turned back toward the city. The lights shimmered beneath them. A breeze moved between them, brushing past like a reminder of time lost. But she didn't leave, and he didn't look away. "If you were Uriah, would you forgive him? Or would you protect your peace and never look back? Tell us below. Stories like this aren't just fiction. They hold up a mirror. So like, comment, and subscribe if you've ever stood at the edge of something unfinished, and had to decide whether to open your heart again or close the chapter for good. The sketch stayed in Aria's hand long after Cassian had given it to her. She hadn't drawn it for him to keep. She'd sketched it in a moment of love, not for memory, but for presence. Back then, they used to dance in the kitchen, on sidewalks, in silence, never to music, never for an audience. Just because they could. Now, holding that fragile paper, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not trust, but something. Cassian didn't say another word. He stayed beside her, still and waiting, as if he knew that pressing for more would ruin whatever was starting to breathe between them. The moon had risen above the city skyline, casting a pale light across the balcony. Inside, the event had returned to its usual rhythm. Laughter, glasses clinking, music soft in the background. But out here, the world was quiet again. She folded the sketch gently and slipped it into her clutch, turning toward him. "Why did you keep it?" He didn't hesitate. "Because it was the last version of us that still felt close." Her eyes met his, and in that moment, she saw not the man who let her go, but the one who used to pull her in, without words, without noise, just with the way he looked at her, like she was the one thing in the room that made sense. He took a step closer, slowly, carefully. "I know it's not enough," he said, "but may I have this moment?" She raised an eyebrow. "You want to dance? Now? No music," he said. "No one watching, just us." She hesitated, then reached for his hand. It was steady. She remembered that touch, not just the weight of it, but the care, the way he never pulled, only invited. Their hands met, and without another word they began to move. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't planned, but it was theirs. One step, then another. Her head rested near his shoulder, his breath slowed to match hers. There was no rhythm guiding them except memory, and no need to speak. Some things didn't require language. This wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a promise. It was a moment suspended between pain and possibility, where both knew what had been lost, and neither pretended it hadn't mattered. His hand settled gently at her back, her fingers pressed against his chest, feeling a heartbeat she once knew by instinct. He leaned close, not rushing, not assuming. "Let me earn my way back," he whispered, one step at a time. She didn't reply, but she didn't let go. And that was the first answer he'd been hoping for. The rest, the explanations, the healing, the questions waiting inside her heart, those would come in their time. For now, under a soft sky and the weight of everything unspoken, they danced. Not to fix the past, not to rewrite it, but to remind each other it had been real, and maybe, just maybe, it still could be. Cassian didn't chase her down after the dance. He didn't flood her with messages or send expensive gifts. There were no dramatic speeches or overnight changes. What came next was quieter. 3 days after the event, Iria received a short note in the mail. "Thank you for showing up. If you'll allow me, I'd like to do the same. No signature, just his handwriting, the kind she recognized from old sticky notes and scribbled ideas left on the fridge years ago." She didn't reply. A week later, he appeared in Maple Bay. Not at her door, not at her favorite cafe, at the community center during a local book fair for kids. He helped set up folding tables, carried boxes of used novels, and politely declined any questions about who he was or why he was there. She noticed him from across the room. He didn't approach, didn't ask to be seen. He just stayed until the work was done. 2 days later he returned, this time to volunteer at the town cleanup. No one connected him to the Holt name. He didn't bring attention. He brought tools and gloves, and he worked like someone who meant it. The third time they crossed paths, it was by accident. Novea spotted him outside the grocery store and ran straight to him, no hesitation. "You came back." He knelt to meet her at eye level. "I said I would." Arlen followed, more reserved. Cassian greeted him with a soft nod, no pressure, just presence. Iria watched from a few steps away. She didn't interfere, didn't interrupt, just observed. Something in her began to shift, not because he was showing up now, but because he wasn't expecting anything in return. The next week, she invited him to Novea's school play. He arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the back row, and clapped louder than anyone else. When Novea waved at him from the stage, his eyes watered. No one saw it, except Iria. She didn't say much that night, but when they stepped outside into the evening air, she handed him a paper bag. "Dinner," she said. "It's just soup." He smiled. "It's more than I deserve." "That's not what this is about," she replied. That moment was small. But something changed after it. He started visiting once a week, always calling ahead, always respectful. Sometimes they took the kids to the park. Sometimes he helped Arlen with math or brought Novea new markers. He never tried to replace anything. He simply joined what was already there. Bit by bit, the walls softened. He made pancakes one Sunday, burnt half of them. The kids still laughed, syrup everywhere. Iria leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like it was from a life she never thought she'd see again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough, for now. The wind outside had softened. The town was still. Inside the cottage, a quiet hum played from the kitchen radio. Arlen had fallen asleep on the couch with a book resting on his chest. Novea was curled up nearby, her head on Cassian's lap, breathing slow, peaceful. Iria stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the dinner plates. Her robe hung loose at her sides, damp hair tucked behind her ear. She looked over her shoulder and caught his eyes. "Thank you for staying late," she said. "You always had a way of making a place feel like home," he replied. She turned off the faucet, wiped her hands on a towel, and moved toward him. Novea stirred slightly, then settled again. Cassian brushed the hair gently from his daughter's face. "She trusts easily," he said. "I don't deserve that." "You're not here because you've earned it," Iria said softly. "You're here because you're trying. That matters more." There was no tension in her voice. No sharpness, just honesty. He looked at her, really looked. No spotlight, no title, no defenses. Just a woman who had once walked away with a broken heart and 2 children he never knew he'd given her. "You still draw?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Only when I feel safe." A pause. "Do you now?" Her answer wasn't with words. She walked to the small desk by the window, pulled open the top drawer, and took out a sketch. Not a scene, not a memory, just a face. His, older, softer, real. He stepped toward her and held the drawing in both hands. No words this time, just a deep breath. "I don't know if I'll ever be the man I should have been back then," he said quietly. "But I know I'm not the man who let you walk away anymore." She didn't offer reassurance. She didn't have to. The sketch was enough. Later, after the kids had been tucked into bed, after the dishes were done and the lights were low, she sat with him on the couch. The fire in the corner glowed low. No flickering drama, just warmth. He pulled a blanket around them both. "Do you think it's possible," he asked, "to start over without pretending nothing ever broke?" She leaned into him, her voice calm. "I don't want to start over. I want to keep going. From here." He placed his hand over hers, not asking, not rushing, just staying. She turned to him slowly. There was no hesitation in her eyes now, no weight of what-ifs, just a soft smile, like something had come full circle. He kissed her, not out of apology, not out of longing, but out of gratitude, the kind that says, "I see you now, I choose you now." What followed wasn't rushed. There was no urgency, just closeness. 2 people rediscovering each other with care, laughter, and unspoken understanding. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but everything that mattered. When she rested her head against his chest later, he wrapped his arms around her like she was something he didn't want to take for granted again. The night held stillness, but not the kind that came from absence. This time, it came from peace, from finally being seen, from finally being chosen, from the quiet knowing that this time, they'd both stay. Have you ever had someone leave, only to return different, wiser, worth the wait? Would you give them a second chance, or protect your peace? Let us know in the comments. And if you felt something during this story, even just once, make sure you like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes that love can heal, even when time tries to break it. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we tell the kind that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.